Not during the comments of just a drizzle and just pour it all on there. There we go. We still got about 5 minutes before we start the live stream. Or it started now. But before we actually start going into our topic. Oh wait. Oh crap. How did I survive the apocalypse? By eating these amazing Jaffa cakes that are upside down. You had one job, Des, to promote Jaffa cakes, and you ruined it. We mentioned Jaffa cakes in the last episode. I bet that. Yeah, Rorik. No, we don't. We can't. We don't have those. Ah, I don't. Well, all we have. We have a store about an hour that way. That is called British Emporium, and this is the only kind they have. It's the orange one. I'd like to try the raspberry ones. I gotta be honest. Why? Why? That sounds so delicious. Hey, I'm learning stuff that I didn't even know there was like a division between the flavors. Like people have their one Jaffa cake that they have. I just thought it was. The Sugar Wars. I have not heard of the Sugar Wars. What are the Sugar Wars? Yes. That that escalated quickly. You will. You will get it. I mean, I know what a peep show is, but is okay. Okay, no. Oh, I don't know what that is, but I think I need to figure out what it is. But I have seen Red Dwarf. That's what it is. Well, it is 2 o'clock. We'll go ahead and start our live stream. Welcome back, everybody that's watching. Joe is my co-host. I'm Des from the 12D20, and I am a DM for the group as well as a player. We do this live stream every other week on Wednesdays, except for one. We'll do it on Thursdays, and we'll let you know why. That one's going to be another special one. So, let's see, what is it? To my left, I'm pointing this way. Hopefully, it gets it. Is Joe, my co-host? He is the huh? Oh, and you're okay. Over there. You are the RPG developer for. We are going to release the Animite Tales on Monday as the beta, so people can see what your game is about and all that stuff. So you're Joe. Hi, Joe. And then we have an extremely awesome guest today. I'm so excited because it was, well, I think, John, we've been talking for like a couple months about, like, I bothered you so much about Fate Core because I needed to get it perfect. And I will always say that I bothered you because it was bothersome. I am bothersome when I ask so many questions. But John's like, no. But yeah, you are the creator of the Red Dice Diaries, and he reviews different RPGs, as well as recently you had mentioned you were going to do Minderlands, and you 2 weekends ago you were at the UK Games Expo. How did that go? I meant to ask you about that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, that description, you are the perfect person for today's today's topic, which is creating stories, one shots in particular. So, you had just mentioned that people that are new to RPGs, you kind of help them get into that one shot kind of like, this is how it goes, this is what you do, this is how you roll kind of thing. And so yeah, if you're go ahead. Mhm. Yeah. That's awesome. That's really cool. It's like, yeah, you never really fully get engulfed with RPGs until you become a GM, I think. Once you become a GM, you and like I said, I always admire all those books in the background. It's like when I watch your videos, I'm like, oh, I want, like, this is mine is like this big. Like, that's my book collection. And then when I watch John's videos, I'm like, someday I will have all those books. So that's awesome. So if you want books, get married to somebody who no. speaking of all your books, like when you choose an RPG to review, like how go for like ones that just came out or ones that have been in the past, like how do you when you decide to do a video, how do you really decide what RPG system you're going to review? Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Sorry. For some reason, somebody mentioned that they're only hearing me, and I'm saying that. Uh-oh. Fault.
Sent me a message saying, "Read that Twitch chat."
Okay, there we go. We read it. Thank you, Will.
There you go, and that's the real-time feedback.
So everything you just said, don't worry, this will be on YouTube as well. So if you didn't hear the first 5 minutes, I apologize. John was being glorious and explaining all the great things. So everything you just said this past 15. No, I'm just kidding. If you, I will post this on YouTube. It's like now I have to post this on YouTube like within seconds of of this going live. Wow, we've been having so many wonderful tech issues these past couple of days.
I think that's one of the things. I mean, obviously, with the sort of whole like Zoom chat and stuff like that. I mean, I've never run a game online, and I run most of my games online now, where there's not been some form of technical issue. But obviously, the payoff to that is you get to run games with like people who you might never have met or even spoke to before we had this technology. I mean, my regular group, we've got like a person in Finland, a person in Denmark. I've gamed with people in like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and those are all opportunities I wouldn't have had if it hadn't been for the technology. So I think even with like the many and various technical hitches we all love to hate, it's still, the benefits still vastly outweigh any problems.
Thank you for giving me an excuse. But as I mentioned before, if you didn't, oh yeah, you heard me, so everybody heard me that this was Joe and this is John, and John was explaining like how he goes into the different who's wherever everybody is. John was explaining that, you know, how he goes. Sometimes people go into they send him a PDF, and or if he's like really into an RPG, and he just goes ahead and makes a video right from there. Have you ever gotten an RPG where somebody sent it to you, and you were just like, "This is crap." Like this is, and you really didn't. Oh, really? Do you want to? Am I allowed to ask? Can you go into that?
I wouldn't name names.
Okay.
Generally, if I get like a PDF and I'm like, I really don't like this at all, or I can't think of any sort of redeeming features, I'd rather not make a video, because I don't think a video which is just me going like, oh, this game's crap, oh, I didn't like it at all, I don't think that really has a lot of value. And if you're gonna spend like however many hours it takes to do like a detailed video review, if people aren't going to get a benefit out of it, I'd rather not do it and put that effort into something that I think people will enjoy.
Excellent. Yeah, I like that point of view. I love that point of view.
I actually do have one question before we go in for John. Actually, in the terms of reviewing, you said that like you know, obviously if there are ones that are crap, then you don't review them because you want to try and stay as much, you know, as little bias as possible. How you know, have you ever come across anything that you just go, it's not for me, but I need to review this? Like, have you ever had one where it's just like, this is not my genre, In other words, has a genre stopped you from actually making you do that review? So like I know for my point of view, someone's actually asked me to like play a couple of different like tabletops, and I've heard that like some of them aren't very good. Again, I'm not going to try and name names because again, the whole point is not against it. But like I've heard a couple of different versions of D&D. People are saying like bad things about it. And the same with a couple of other different systems that are in some way similar to D&D or some way similar to Mutants and Masterminds. And some people are saying like, "Oh, play it," and some other people are telling me not to. Do you ever have that moment where it's like someone goes, "Oh, try this," and you're just thinking, "Oh," you could just go, "Oh, thank you," and then you think, "This is not my cup of tea. This is not something that I would ever touch." And yeah, does that taint it, or does that just mean that just puts the guillotine right down?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few books where sort of they've either been like quite hyped up, or like people I know and whose opinions I trust have sort of recommended them to me. But also, we've all got different opinions, and then I've bought a copy of the book, or I've been sent a PDF of it, and I've gone, it's really not my sort of flavor of game. But I've always said, like, even if I read a game and I'm like, I'm never going to GM this game. It doesn't really suit my style of GMing. I'm not really into it. But if someone I knew who I considered to be a good GM was like, "Oh, I'm going to run this game," I'd always go, especially if it's like a one shot, to like bring it back to one shots. I'd always go, "Do you know what? I'll give it a try," because most of the one shots I tend to play tend to be about sort of like 4 hours in length. It's like one evening. So the way I look at it is like, even if I'm playing a one shot and I'm like, "Oh, this system's really not grabbing me," or whatever, as long as the GM's good and I'm enjoying sort of associating with the rest of the players, it's 4 hours. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm going to ask that question. I had it as one of my last questions, but because you mentioned it, I'm going to say how much. This was your question, John. It's how much prep time is appropriate for one shots. So you were mentioning it's like, if it's a one shot that you're not particularly fond of and you just still want to check it out, like how much prep time would you give for a system that you liked versus a system that you didn't like too? And I guess the story.
I mean, I think part of it as well depends on how much you actually enjoy doing prep. I mean, some bits of the prep, like the world creation and sort of coming up with the actual like plot ideas and like NPCs and stuff like that, I really enjoy as activities almost unto themselves. So I don't mind doing a bit more prep in those sort of areas. Whereas someone who doesn't enjoy them, you don't need to necessarily do the levels of prep that I sometimes do for games. I mean, I run quite a lot of Power of the Apocalypse games for one shots. And one of the big draws of them to me is because the backgrounds tend to be quite evocative and the system is quite simple and sort of based on a lot of give and take between the GMs, sort of getting players to help submit ideas and expanding on the ideas they give you. That almost directly supports that whole sort of like minimal prep idea. And I also think, because I've been GMing for quite a few years, I'm now confident enough, if it's a system I know reasonably well, that I can go, yeah, okay, 4 hours. I can run a 4-hour game with a system I'm reasonably familiar with without too much prep. Whereas if it's a system I don't know, or maybe a genre that I'm not as familiar with, I'll tend to put more prep in, not because you necessarily need it, but just because it makes me feel more comfortable going into the game, that like whatever happens, I'm prepared for it.
Yeah, especially as a GM, getting to know your players. And I know before we went live, we talked about friends versus strangers, prepping for both of those. Yeah. It's like, how much prep do you give for friends versus strangers?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the advantages if you're role playing with like a group of people well, is that you sort of know what bits of the game they're interested in.
Yeah.
So if you're playing with like just use a stereotypical example, if you're playing with like someone like they always play the sort of like the occult style, sort of like researchy style character, you could be like, right, well, I know I've got to put a few mysteries in, a few twists and turns and stuff for them to discover, and you can figure that into your plot. Whereas if it's a group of people you don't know at all, you have to have a sort of more general, sort of broader smattering of different things. And then as they're you can see how they react to stuff that you throw into the game. It's almost like you throw out a lot of different plot hooks. You see which ones they go for, and they can say, right, that's what this group seems to be into. I'll elaborate a bit more on that in the game. Whereas obviously if you're familiar with the group, you sort of know that going in, so you've got a little bit of an advantage in that sort of scale.
You make a really good point. As definitely as a GM, you have to read your audience. You have to be able to read your audience. Like, oh, are they just staring blankly at their phones, or are they actually like, oh, waiting for the next thing for the GM to say, kind of thing. Joe, what about? Put down your phone.
I took the opportunity. Come on.
Well, now the spotlight's on you, because I'm going to ask you. It's like when we did that one shot where we had to cancel the regular session. And we had to make our character, like I made Link from Legends of Zelda.
Don't talk to me about that one. No, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, like, how much prep time, especially, in getting a one-shot at the last second when your regular game cancels, like, how much do you think would be a good time for you to have for
Honestly,
prepping?
I have 2 big points to make, and the biggest one that I can make, honestly, is just, like... The first one I will say, and this is probably the easiest and quickest one to state, is it's dependent on the system. It's dependent on the system that you're using. For instance, D&D could be a little bit more difficult than, like, from what I've heard about Fate, where it's mostly storytelling. With Animite Tales, it was like, well, this is universal. Like, these roles mean this, these roles mean that. This character could be statted out in this game like that. And I did it. But again, that's where it leaks into the system versus the person who's making it. Because I'm pretty sure all 3 of us have had to make a one-shot, either in an emergency point where someone's like, oh, I can't make it for this one session. You're like, but we need you. Or 3 people can't make it, but then 5 other people are like suddenly coming out of the woodwork saying that, oh, we really want to do this with you guys. And so you're like, well, I can't do the normal, puzzle traveler. I can't do the normal story. I can't do the normal, etc., etc. But I can do a one-shot, and I can get it done within the next couple of days, as long as I've got this prep time, as long as I've figured out what's happening, as long as I've figured out the story. And for that, that's part 2. The person who does it, the DM, the narrator, the GM, anyone who is doing that is so important, because you could get someone who's got a million different books behind them, but ultimately it's the person who's in front of them. That's the thing. It's the person who reads them. It's the person in front of them that can be the person who changes that. I could take any of those books and read them, and I guarantee you that I could not make a decent enough story with them because I haven't got any experience with them. But you take someone who's had enough experience with it, or even who has that kind of mind, who can just fire off ideas and immediately just be like, oh, this would be a really cool story. Like, I've got to write this down.
I don't know anybody like that. I don't know anybody like that.
Well, Des, you do now. But for instance, in the very first ever one-shot I did, it was themed. Like, every one-shot that I do has a theme, and the one-shot idea, the first ever one, was a friend of ours couldn't make it. And we were like, well, this is the 2nd episode, and we really need you guys. So I've got this idea. It's Halloween on that day, so I'll do a Halloween special. And so it was literally just a boss rush. They had to fight an immortal. They had to fight a guy who can manipulate pumpkins, and they had to fight a vampire. But the thing is that ultimately, when it came down to that main core concept, it was just really quick. It was able to be done within about 2.5 hours, and then after that, we just drank. But that was it. I mean, I've gotten a lot better with a lot more of them, but whenever it comes to them, I just do 0 prep time. Like for that Monday session a couple of weeks ago that Des was talking about, I had like an hour, maybe an hour and a half tops, because I didn't know that one person who was necessary for that part of the story to be done was going to be missing until then. So I just went, okay, well, I've got an idea. So I'll make this one-shot where everyone has a character based around a theme, and the theme was just a character from fiction, your favorite character from fiction, or a character from fiction that you've always wanted to see how they played.
Did we all choose video games?
Technically, no.
Oh, okay.
And technically, yes, because the character that my cousin had chosen, although doesn't originate from a video game, has been in at least 2 video games. But we had Des, who played as Link. We had my brother, who played Ishin Ashina from the new Sekiro Shadows Die Twice game. And then we had my cousin who played as Dio, the Master of Time from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So we had 3 different characters who had entirely different power sets and abilities, and we made it work. And the theme was, again, another boss rush. I have done a couple of one-shots that were nothing to do with boss rushes. But honestly, that, for me, is probably the quickest one-shot, because then you can just go, yeah, here are 3 enemies or 3 monsters or 3 bosses, fight them, and that's the story. And the story was actually fairly interesting, because it was more about 3 powerful warriors have been stolen from their worlds by these beings from above the multiverse.
And you had a really good point when you had mentioned themes. That was another question. John, have you ever done a themed RPG one-shot before?
Oh yeah, plenty of times. I mean, one of the, if you're going to run a one-shot, I mean, one of the things you need to keep in mind is obviously the less time you spend sort of getting everyone settled into the genre and the system, the more you can make the most of that time with actually running the game and doing the enjoyable bit. So having a recognizable genre or some sort of common reference point that you can sort of hinge a game on just sort of shortcuts a lot of that. For instance, if you start running a one shot and you say, it's going to be a bit like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, everyone knows that film. Everyone's got a common frame of reference. They can all sort of get on board and go, all right, I'm going to play like an archaeologist, or I'm going to play like a fortune hunter, I'm going to play a pilot of the biplane or whatever. And you can easily get into that. Whereas if you do it, I would probably not go for more sort of detailed backgrounds by default in a one shot, because don't get me wrong, they're great for campaigns because you've got a lot of time to explore them and really get the most out of them.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're saying 4, 5, 6 hours or whatever, if you spend 2 of those hours explaining a detailed background and generating characters and stuff like that, you've effectively cut your playtime down by half potentially. Whereas you could, if you just sort of right, it's a bit like this, right, boom, let's get on with characters and jump straight in, you can spend as much of your time as possible actually doing the gaming.
That's actually a really, really good point. And Joe, going back to that one shot that we did with you, what I really liked what you did is you had 3 different characters that were completely from different areas, and you had brought them. That's another thing about one shots, is starting them off. It's like, how do we just get the game going? We only have hours to do this game, not days, hours to do this game. Is like, we need to push in now. So how did you decide that, Joe, when you were doing the one shot for us? How did you decide that the 3 were just gonna be there as the champions? Because I liked that story. That was good.
You see, Des, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist.
I'm not a scientist, but
I'm not a scientist, but I don't know if you guys have this. Actually, this is a question for you, both of you. If you've ever come up with an actual campaign that is set in Dungeons and Dragons, Fate, any system, and you've just gone, I've got this amazing idea for a campaign. You guys might at least know that there's an entire universe in your mind, and you're just I really want these characters to be explored. I really want this to happen, that to happen. With a one shot, making just a short moment as to the reason as to why 3 characters suddenly appeared out of nowhere and had to fight against enemies was probably the easiest decision I've ever had to do, especially because one of my favorite things is the whole multiverse idea, the whole timelines idea, and the whole different dimensions thing. So instantly it was you guys are here sent by these alternate reality creatures that basically want to see how great these 3 warriors are, and it turns out Link is the best of them all.
I know, yeah, he was great. But John, I'll let you answer that one first. Question, bringing 3 people together, you said, Joe?
Yeah. How
bringing...
have you ever had to come up with a campaign or a one shot and just gone I've got this entire world in my head? Have you ever had to just create a contrived reason as to why they're there, or have you just been able to easily come up with a reason as to why they're all together?
I think if it's a one shot, it's a lot easier because you can start sort of stuff in media res, so in the middle of the action. So to 20 with what we were talking about before, if I say we're doing our sort of hypothetical game based on Indiana Jones, and I say, right, the first scene is like you guys you've got your treasure map, and like the evil soldiers who are trying to steal it off you are like attacking your base camp. You can literally jump straight into that scene. Everyone knows what's going on. They're trying to get to the plane. They're trying to escape. Whatever. That's grand. In a campaign, it's often a little bit more involved because you're expecting, certainly I know I am when I'm playing a campaign, you're expecting more opportunities to sort of develop your character organically. Mm-hmm. And part of that is sort of like getting together with the other characters, getting to know them. And whether that's the sort of usual like contrived, you've like met at a tavern or whatever, or whether it's something more tied into your campaign.
The ever so famous tavern.
That's it, exactly. I mean, to be honest, one of the sort of like cheats I tend to use is if I've got an idea for a campaign where it's like I'm starting a game in July, which is set in the Midlands, where the idea is it's in the game's version of the City of London. And we did like a bit of a session zero chatting about what sort of things people were interested in. And we came up with this idea of like, there's some shadowy conspiracy trying to topple the throne at work within the city. And the player characters are sort of, I suppose, they're independent occult investigators, if you will. Yeah. So to get them all into that, I sort of threw it back onto the players a little bit and said, right, well, each of you think about a way in which your character has come into contact with that conspiracy. So straight away, by sort of telling them that, like, right, you need to think of a reason why your character is going to get involved in all these shenanigans, it means I don't have to like contrive a reason to put them all together because they've already got at least one thing in common. And I find with most players, when you sort of you give them that one reason, they'll then come up with sort of little other reasons why they've got things in common. So it can take a lot of that difficulty out of it. Otherwise, just coming in blankly, it can be quite difficult to create a reason that doesn't feel contrived to bring a group of heroes together.
Especially if they all have like different personalities. It's like you have like somebody in the shadows that really is kind of a loner, but you also have this other character that wants to be part of everything. And so it's like, why in the world would those two be together?
That's it. I mean, to use like the sort of stereotypical like D&D classes, if you say, oh well, yeah, we've got this wizard who's never been outside his wizard's tower and he spends all his time studying like huge books of arcane lore, and you're like, oh well, why is he associating with like Nordic barbarian, like loincloth wearing barbarian who like can barely speak, never mind read, and then aside from the fact that like, oh, we need someone with like loads of hit points to stand behind so he doesn't get killed, it can be very difficult to bring them together. Whereas in that example, if you said, oh right, the main enemy in that game is going to be an evil necromancer, just as a random example, if you said to people at the start, right, think of how this necromancer has wronged your character, and then suddenly the mage and the barbarian, they're like, well, we might not have much else in common, but we've both been done over by this necromancer. We're both trying to get revenge or some sort of resolution for that. And that's enough to build that sort of initial bridge. And then obviously you strengthen that with the experiences they have in game that sort of bring them together and cement those relationships even more.
Yeah,
that's actually a really good point, though. Like this is actually a good point. Have you ever had in a one shot? Have you ever had a particular theme that you've actually ever done? Like this is a question that I've actually had for you guys. Have you ever had to come up with a fun, like a sort of like more light-hearted theme where it's just like, oh, for instance, like I pitched to Des a while back, the theme would be Ninja Turtles, using Ninja Turtles. But yeah, have you guys ever done that for a one shot? Something silly like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the most silly thing I did was I did like a Flash Gordon one shot using Fate. with the sort of idea, like none of them were playing the sort of like the main characters out of the films or the comics or anything, but again it was everyone has at least sort of seen the Flash Gordon film, so everyone knows a little bit about it. So it was quite silly, it was quite fun, everyone just sort of jumped into it and they were like, all right, it's a bit sci-fi, a bit fantasy, mainly played for laughs, nothing's taken too seriously. All the Hawkmen talking like big booming Brian Blessed voices, that sort of thing. So like we had a guy who was like, oh, I want to play Voltan's daughter out of Brian Blessed character's daughter, and I was like, yeah, that's fine. It's just a silly one shot, no problem. We had this guy like booming out, sort of like doing his like Brian Blessed impression. Absolutely great fun. but again, it was something that everyone recognized, and everyone sort of knew that was the tone we were sort of going for. So some of those characters probably wouldn't have worked in other games, but because I'd made it very clear from the start, right, this is just like a silly, fun one shot. We're not taking it too seriously, and everyone's really embraced that mindset. It worked really well.
I think the 2 one-shots that come to mind, because I'm a recent DM, I've only been GMing since almost a year, so not even a year. But I guess the silly one is the easy one that's been, well, it's been easy and hard at the same time to prep, is the Monty Python one. One we were supposed to do on Sunday. That was easy because I already had a film that there's a reason. You know who Sir Lancelot is, you know who King Arthur is, Sir Bedivere, and if you've seen the movies, like YouTube only seen that for the of Monty Python, so that's the only thing you've seen.
Damn it, guys. We're going to lose our English thread.
Yeah, I know, right? But so getting to know the NPCs, like, that's super easy. They're already there laid out for me. It's all a matter of making sure they make sense to each other, because, you know, taking Monty Python sketches and adding them to for anybody out there that's watched Monty Python, like the try to remember NPC, the spam lady, and they go visit her, and then she gives them 5 pounds of spam, and then that's adding that to the Monty Python Holy Grail universe, or movie. So making sure that it makes sense. Another one shot that and that was like, I told all players, do not take this seriously. Do not take this one shot seriously. Be as crazy as possible. Be as stupid as possible. And then they did it. Like at Scarborough, they nailed it. And then on Sunday, or when we decided to reschedule it and add another, add you and Ben to it, it's like, I have high hopes for it. Especially since we have somebody that has an English accent, it's even better. But and then the other one that comes to mind is the Lord of the Rings one. That one was supposed to be a very serious one shot. I had researched that.
Tell that to Ben.
I know. For anybody who's seen that video, yeah, that's how it ended up. But so what happened was, in prepping it, I took weeks to prep it. Like, okay, this is my characters, and I have to figure out, going back to the question before, how in the world am I going to get all these villains together? Because I asked my players, I said, do you want to play villains? They're like, yeah, let's play villains. So I was like, okay, either Disney villains, Lord of the Rings villains, or Harry Potter. And they all narrowed down on Lord of the Rings. We want to do Lord of the Rings villains. I was like, okay, cool, that's going to be fun. And then I realized how powerful every single Lord of the Rings villain was. And that's when I got together with John, and I was like, help me. I'm doing this fake core system, and we're doing a one shot. And so I was like, okay, how am I going to get all these powerful characters together? And I come up with a story. I researched, I looked in all the Lord of the Rings lore, the Tolkien lore, what happened. So I found out that 200 years after, Aragorn had passed away. So 200 years after that was a perfect time, because Gandalf was gone, Frodo was gone, Legolas was gone, Gimli got all the heroes of Middle-earth gone. And the last hero left would have been Aragorn's son, who's still alive. I was like, okay, that could be like the one boss is Aragorn's son. I was like, okay, how am I going to get these powerful characters together? Oh, a necromancer. So I thought up of this, me as the necromancer. I was like, okay, she's going to, because it's not uncommon for a necromancer to bring back things from the dead. Like, okay, so I gathered all the villains, and then, and then Ben was like, oh yeah, you will be well rewarded. And I did say, I was like, oh, I just wanted to serve you, and I wanted you to live and take over this world and stuff like that. And he's like, oh, cool. I don't have to pay you. And then You're a fan. And so, and then it got ridiculous when they realized how powerful they were. They had Smaug and they had the Balrog. Smaug would just pick up the Balrog and just drop it on cities. And then you had other people like Gollum, going around, I want jewelry. And you had Shelob the spider going after and wrapping up villagers and stuff like that. And so it was super easy for them to take over. And that was a case where it was supposed to be super serious. It was a dark story, and it just turned into Sauron passing out pamphlets for them to join the evil side.
I mean, to be fair, I kind of tried to make my sort of one shot, the multiversal champions one shot, be kind of serious, and it ended up that because the way that we did it was every time that they beat a boss, there would be a wish that they would be granted. Now, each time, my brother who was playing Ishin Ashina, he's like this feudal lord, like he's like a warrior saint, so therefore, like in his world, he is like one of the strongest warriors that had ever existed. So he only wanted things that are like to do with his conviction. So he's like, I wish for a stronger sword, or I wish for myself to be able to wield like this dangerous weapon in my world. And then at the end, he was like, I wish for no more immortality to ever exist in my version of my world. And then you had like Link, who was like, I want a stronger stomach so that I can fight these people. Or, I want a horse.
I had Link, since Link wasn't used to gore and stuff like that. I said, okay, I need to roll for willpower or something. And he rolled a 4, and then he rolled a 3, and then he went a 2. I was like, you know what? He's thrown up so many times, he's just dry heaving at this point because he's not used to all this gore.
But in the end, you asked for a horse on your second wish, and my cousin who was playing as Dio wanted a stand arrow, which is basically an arrow that grants people a stand, or if a stand user stabs themselves with it, it grants them a new ability for their stand. Now, when everyone jumped at this new boss, at the final third boss, Dio stabbed Link's horse with the arrow, and it just keeled over. And only I knew that it was going to survive, but obviously Link
didn't.
And Dio and Ishin, they were all preoccupied with it. Well, Dio kept looking at the horse, but Link was like, I'll deal with that in a sec. I need to kill this boss now.
Hang on.
And the final wish that Link got was that they would forever be like the puddle at the beginning of the fight, because they eventually turned one of the enemies into a puddle. And so Dio was then forever trapped in the world of champions to fight enemies that he could never win against.
So John, from your experience with RPGs, like what is a good RPG for storytelling versus a good RPG for encounters? Because when I did the Lord of the Rings one, I immediately went to Fate, but my players really wanted encounters. And so it's like I had to merge kind of D&D and Fate together at that point. But, going from people that, like me, that don't know, that's still learning about a lot of RPGs, like what's really good for just storytelling and what's good for really just encounter after encounter after encounter, one-shots.
Well, I mean, I think D&D is a good example of a game that's built around the idea of encounters. I mean, we saw it in sort of like 3rd edition, 4th edition, and it carries on in 5th edition, where a lot of the sort of abilities you have, I mean, the whole idea of like short rests and long rests, like regain certain abilities, is based around the idea that you will have so many encounters between rest periods. So the whole game sort of built around that, and I think the mechanics support that quite well. In terms of sort of slightly more narrative games, I mean, obviously I'm a fan of the Fate system, but that tends to be a more sort of, certainly with the aspects and things like that tends to be a more story-led system, which it works really well if you've got a group of players who are willing to sort of invest in the characters and create and sort of understand the idea that they've got to create aspects that are going to link into the game world that can then be used to like pull different plots in and like bring stuff in that's going to interest their characters. Whereas and not to disparage D&D at all, if you're going to run D&D, you could literally have 5 people turn up, gen some characters, jump into a sort of more or less standard D&D world. You are good to go. That's grand. I don't think Fate would work as well if you were doing that. However, if you want something that's a little bit more free form and you're willing to put the effort in, you can get a really good game out of Fate, but it will be a very different sort of, like say, slightly more story-led game. And that's not to say you can't include story and plot in D&D. Of course you can, but the system is generated around the idea of encounters and a certain style of gaming, whereas Fate's based around the idea of a different style of gaming.
Okay, so here's the anybody. I know we've mentioned Fate Core before. We've been showed the book, so this is the Fate Core system. This is. I know that I know that there's a lot of PDFs and stuff like that, but I like to have the books so I can make notes and stuff like that. Oh, so John, have you ever? So I got this recently. Have you ever done Fiasco?
Yeah, I've got a copy of it.
So I've been looking through it. Is this good for story? I'm guessing it's good for storytelling, right?
It's one of these sort of like GM-less storytelling games, and basically the idea. And I've played quite a few games of Fiasco. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. The idea of Fiasco is you play a group of characters who are involved in a situation, and the game picks up just as something starts going wrong with that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So you might be like a group of people who've planned like a bank robbery or something, and the game would pick up when something goes wrong with your heist. And the idea is, as you go through, I mean, I forget the exact mechanics, I've not played it for a little while, but as you go through, you run various different scenes, and when it's your turn to choose, you can choose to either have your character be the focus of that scene, or you can let someone else be the focus of that scene. And if you're the focus, everyone else gets to sort of pick the nature of that scene. So you could be like, my character's going to be the star of this scene. Then the other players might be like, oh, this scene's going to take place in an alleyway outside a security guard at the bank's just been shot, and like the police sirens are coming in the distance, and you role play that out. If you allow someone else to be the focus, you get to pick more of what the scene's about. And as you go along, depending on whether the outcome of scenes is positive or negative to you, you accumulate like a number of, I think it's either black or white dice.
Yep.
Then at the very end, once you've all done your scenes, you roll up the dice, one colour subtracts from another. And depending on what result you get, you either have like a largely positive outcome for your character in their sort of epilogue, or you have like a negative outcome from them. And it's all sort of narrated with like let's say, I'm running a game for you guys, and we run a scene, and your character Des isn't involved in the scene. You might say, "Oh well, for the scene, I'm going to take on the role of like the clerk at the bank who's like trying to press the silent alarm or whatever." And you can switch roles around like that, and you can also jump around in the sort of the timeline of the story.
Yeah.
So even if your character dies in a scene, you might run the next scene, and because you get to choose what it's made, you might be like, oh, this scene's a flashback that takes place like 5 days before the heist when we first meet up. So you could still potentially be your character in that scene. And there's basically a number of playbooks in the back of the book where it offers you some like ready-made, like here's a scenario that's good to go with some sample characters. So in terms of like a one shot, just sort of like pick up, like say, you don't even need a GM for it. You just need like some dice and some other people and a few bits of paper. It's really good.
You know what that sounds like? That actually sounds like because when I was doing acting for about 4 years between the end of high school to the actual point of college, that sounds a lot like two different things. That sounds like yes and also sounds like what are you doing? Now, if anyone doesn't know this, yes and is just a simple thing of someone talks about something and then they say yes and I'm doing this, or yes and let's talk about this. So at no point you're never saying no, not, never, or that's boring, let's talk about something else. And then what are you doing is basically two people act out a scene and then one person tags on to the other person and says, what are you doing? They then turn around and say something based on the particular action they're doing. So say, for instance, like someone's holding a rope and then they say, what are you doing? And they go, oh, I'm holding a baguette. What are you doing? And then just grabs it and they do the scene. That sounds so much like that, but with dice and specific scenarios that could go wrong or very right, depending on the dice. So, I mean, that personally sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's very much like you say, like those sort of improvisational sort of theatre style scenarios. Another game that's good for that, I don't know if you've seen it, it's a game called Microscope.
All right.
And the idea of Microscope is you build, the best way I can describe it is like a fictional timeline. So at the very start of the game, you decide on roughly what the timeline's going to hold. So you might be like, oh, we're going to construct a timeline talking about the rise and fall of the third great dwarven empire or whatever. And each time it gets to your turn, you sort of put down like either a period of history or a distinct event that happens within that period of history, and you sort of construct a timeline using index cards. And again, it's GMless, but the idea is once something's put down, that is locked in place. So you can move back and forwards on the timelines as you want. But if you say put down like, oh, in the third year, the first great dwarven king was killed, that cannot be altered. But you can elaborate and you can build on that, and you can sort of put different spins on it. And again, that's a really good game for like sort of 2-3 hours, especially if you've not got a GM. There are guidelines in it where you can role play out distinct scenes, and you could bring more of a sort of role play element into it. But even without that, just the actual game of constructing the timeline is like very entertaining.
No, that sounds really cool.
Oh,
what was that system again? Sorry,
Microscope.
Microscope. Okay.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, I know we talked a little bit about different timing. You have hours to play on a one shot. So this is a question for both you, Joe and John. How long do you think a good one shot story would play? And Joe, you kind of added on to that question. It's like, how long does a one shot need to be? So you have these two systems, Fiasco and Fate, where it could be like 2 hours. Maybe, when it comes to straight up storytelling, at that point it's a movie, per se. But if you have something like Dungeons and Dragons that you're running, or Pathfinder, or Adventures in Middle Earth, one shots, it's like that one, because of the rules and because of the actions and encounters taking turns on battles, that could potentially take up 8 hours on a one shot. It really could if you got into that. So to you guys, what would be like a good minimum and maximum?
That's always a weird one for me, because on my first ever 6 weeks of working on Animite Tales, the alpha testers, basically I kind of almost tortured them by putting them through 5-hour sessions. Sometimes they would go on to 6 or 8 hours. And eventually we were able to get it down to 2 to 3, sometimes 4, if it ever stretched that far. But personally, with a one shot, I try and keep it between 2 to 3 hours, because I feel like 3 hours is what you'd mostly do in a basic normal session for people who have other things to do. So it's like, we'll stick to 3 hours. We do this, and then we'll go off and have an entire week off, or we'll do something once a month, or depending on whether it's a session based on a campaign or it's an actual one shot. So personally, I think usually its minimum is 2 to 3 hours. Mostly because, as you said, it's kind of like a movie. You're set in for that particular amount of time, and it helps you get through that amount of content. Really, it gets you through that sort of content that you wanted to get through. A one shot that I did to sort of just put it into perspective was a one shot that I did was, as I said before, it was just a boss rush, and so therefore I could make the enemies as tough or as weak as I needed them to be to fit in that time frame. Mm-hmm. And after doing 3 bosses, who 2 of them were not very difficult. In fact, all 3 of them weren't very difficult because you all had special skills that were really helpful. Yeah. But it's the way that you went through it that covered an hour and a half, and then the last half hour was based on what happened to them after they left, after they were sent away from that world.
Yeah.
Now people could do it to so that was 2 hours, but people could do it to 4 hours. As you said, John, a bank heist. Personally, I can't believe that I still haven't done that one shot for Animite Tales yet. In a world of superheroes, we haven't got one where it's you guys are a bunch of villains and bank heist. I mean, yeah.
That's an idea. You'll have to do that for our one shots now. Expectation has just been set, Joe.
Yeah, that's for me. So I'd say minimum is about 2 to 3 hours. But what do you think, John?
I mean, I think up until recently, most of the sessions I play in tend to be sort of 3-4 hours long, and that goes for whether it's a session in a campaign or whether it's just a one shot. As I say, that when I first started doing the games on demand at UK Games Expo, and I was sort of told, it's going to be these 2-hour taster sessions, I was like, am I going to be able to fit a game in 2 hours?
Yep.
And you do have to keep certain things in mind. So it's if because I run quite a lot of sort of OSR games, so older sort of versions of D&D, you have to keep in mind that if you run a really big combat in D&D, that can take up like an awful lot of time just with the rules and the sheer amount of dice rolling and sort of more sort of tactical play. So what I tend to do is I'll tend to have one encounter per hour, sort of like roughly sketched out. Then I'll probably have like maybe one or two other ones that you can like bring in. So sort of like if I was doing a 2-hour game, I might have two main encounters, but in case the players like breeze through all of them or avoid them, I've got a couple of sort of lightly sketched out little backup ones that I've not put as much prep into, but I know that I can bring in and sort of fill if I need to. So for instance, I was running a game of White Star at the UK Games Expo, which is basically an OSR sort of space opera science fiction-y game. And the idea was they were on this space station where this rogue AI was sort of converting the crew into like these cybernetic zombie things on board the ship. Nice. and it was trying to, the captain who'd realized this was happening had sort of sabotaged the ship so they couldn't get anywhere. Mm-hmm. And all these zombies were now trying to like cannibalize the ship to get it moving so they could go Borg style, they could go to another world and like colonize that. And I had a couple of encounters there where it was like, oh, they're going to either encounter this like AI and some of these cyber zombies, or they're going to encounter some of these escaped alien specimens that are like leeching power from the energy room. But then I had a few other bits and pieces where I was like, oh yeah, we've got the captain who's left like a few logs. So there's this going on with the computer. So if they didn't go in those directions, or they just sort of went, like, as one of the player characters did, like looked through the sort of like the plexiglass plate on the door, saw all these like sort of bug style Starship Trooper aliens in the drive room, and he was like, nope.
Oh, no way.
I'm out. So, which entirely sensible in character. He was on his own. He was like, no, I don't fancy taking those on my own. So I had plenty of other stuff that I'd not really sketched out in massive detail, but because I knew the overall story, like I'd not got every individual sort of log entry sketched out for the captain, but because I knew like the captain had recognized what was happening and she'd sabotaged the ship, sort of sacrificing herself to stop this rogue AI getting somewhere, I could then add those details as we went along.
That's awesome. When you said that you have backup encounters just in case they fly through the other main encounters, I'm like, I need to write that down.
Oh, I mean,
I know my players that are watching right now, they're like, shut up, John, don't do it, don't give her ideas, god damn it.
Well, that's it might be something like if you're running like a D&D game, and let's say you're on the trail of like an orc war horde or something like that. I might just, for one of these extra encounters, I might just have, and there's some bandits in the nearby forest that are trying to rob people on their way past. And that might be all it is. But as long as you've got some generic stats and stuff like that, you can bring in these bandits if you need to. Like, let's say an encounter earlier on the road going past the forest, the characters have breezed through it. You were expecting it to take a bit longer. You can then always have them encounter these bandits, and you can elaborate on that. You don't need to spend like hours doing extra prep for it. So you get a lot out of not really putting much in, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Now I think I have my monsters manual like on this side, because since I do my games online, they can see everything, as well as because we do live stream on Twitch, the games, I'll sometimes show the map on Fantasy Grounds. And I'll have some players actually watching Twitch, and they'll be watching to see if I have any side stuff on Fantasy Grounds, like backup or like encounters ready to go. So it's like I have to have my notes like out of view, or my players are going to be like, oh shit, guys, we shouldn't go down that road.
That's level 20 dragon.
I say, because I use like Roll20 for a lot of mine, I actually have it open in two windows, one with like a GM view and one with like a player view, and I just record the player view. So I can do all my stuff on the other window.
See, for me, it's kind of opposite. I kind of just like, sometimes if I sometimes fudge the modifiers, but not in a good way. I never feel like, because a lot of the things that I used to do is I made them and I'd be like, haha, now this perfect enemy is ready. And he starts beating every single one of my players. Like, these guys are like mutants, creatures, super beings, demigods. And this one guy with like ninja techniques is able to like take them all down. I'm like, and then he falls over. That's not believable. But if I suddenly go, this one stat of his is really low, so if you hit him, you're going to basically be on a winning streak after that. And so that's exactly what I do. I make a lot of, weak points in these characters. But for me, I think the thing is that like on my first ever in the first half of this project, whenever I did an encounter, I'd feel that they were too powerful. Like we had a mini boss who was nerfed so that he could be a one-on-one fight, and the whole point is that like halfway through, he then goes, "I concede, you win. You're strong enough. Congratulations, you've survived." Instead, people went, "Oh no, he's not giving up. He's not giving in." And it's just like, well, he hasn't taken a lot of damage, but neither is the other guy. And I mean, he's healing himself, so he's fine. It's like, no, we have to help him. So they break down the door, charge in, and they try to take on this guy. And then the entire crowd goes nuts and starts jumping in the arena and starts fighting, and it just got worse. And so for my encounters, I sometimes try and nerf them a bit, but then build them up over time, and mostly because like some of the time it does get strung out a little bit. But I've noticed that a one-on-one fight is a lot more, or a one-on-everyone fight is a lot more easy for everyone to deal with, or a lot more seeming to be like, oh yeah, no, this guy is so overpowered because he can take on all 5 of us. But ultimately, it's teamwork that wins the day. Whereas if I have, it's 5-on-5, it's just immediately like, Joe, what have you done?
Everything's on fire.
Yeah. And suddenly I start realizing I should probably stop putting pyrokinetics in my campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like stats for sort of like enemies, etc., that we were talking about earlier, I mean, again, to use D&D as an example, what I'll tend to do, especially if I'm going to like UK Games Expo or another convention where I can't physically like take all of my book collection with me. I have to be very careful of space. I'm like traveling on trains and whatever.
Yeah.
I'll be, if I'm running a game and I'm like, right, okay, well, what are the main sort of people they're likely to encounter? So if I get like, oh, they might encounter like humans, goblins, and orcs as the main things, I'll go, right, I need to make sure I've got like a piece of paper that's got the stats for like a generic level 1 human or whatever, a basic goblin, and a basic orc. And then if I go, oh right, yeah, there's some orcs, but I want one of them to be like a spellcaster, it's easy to go like, oh yeah, this one's got the same stats, but he's also got a couple of spells he can cast, and just like pick a couple of spells. And I don't need to have every sort of enemy like sort of statting out to like the full sort of like nth degree sort of stat block. You just need whatever information you need to make yourself comfortable with being able to adapt the information you've got to serve the needs of the game.
Exactly. Well, thank you. Oh, did you have one more question?
I did have one question. I think it was one that you wrote down, and I think it was something. I've already forgotten it now. That's not good. I think it was something along the lines of, have you ever done one where you've actually built a one shot and used mechanics from one game and another, two games or multiple games together to come up with a specialized one shot?
So the question was, have you ever created your own story for one shots using multiple systems? And the example that I used was that Lord of the Rings one, where I used Fate and Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons for the concept of if they get into a battle, this is how it needs to like turn by turn base, but Fate mainly to tell the whole story. But John, have you ever?
Yeah, I mean, I've done it a few times, because I think depending on what the genre is. So if we're like running a fantasy game, it's fairly easy to just ignore the stats and go, okay, right. So
yeah.
I've ran this in D&D, but I'm now running it in like the AEG system or whatever. Well, I've got stats for orcs in that system. I've just used those stats for orcs instead of those stats for orcs from a different game. Yeah. That's fine, but you can also run it in different genres as well. I mean, I did an adventure module with Glyn Seal, who does the Midlands, called Behind the Walls, and that was a sort of fantasy sort of delve into ruins that was sort of ancient Roman, sort of like the equivalent of in that campaign setting, sort of ruins. And it was all involved with like this huge sort of like shambling mound creature was like the final sort of enemy. And although I didn't run it in a different genre, my wife runs a Star Trek game online that she runs using Fate. And she took that sort of campaign idea that I'd written, that sort of adventure module, and ran it for her Star Trek group. And she was just like, right, okay, well, instead of being set in like an isolated village in like a misty valley, it's on this small sort of backwater, low-tech world. Instead of being like a shambling mound sort of fungus monster, it's some sort of alien life form that's vegetable-based. And you can quite easily sort of like file the serial numbers off an adventure and sort of run it in different game systems.
Does your wife have her own channel like you do?
No, she doesn't have her own channel. She doesn't really. She only really got into like running the sort of online stuff fairly recently. She has like a sort of regular group of people she runs for, but she doesn't really like record her games or sort of publish them or anything like that.
Okay, if she ever does, let us know.
I'd
like to watch that. Cool. Well, thank you, John, so much. Again, this is John from Red Dice Diaries. I will add his YouTube link to this YouTube video once it's on YouTube, so you can hear what the heck they were saying the first 10 minutes of the video.
Exclusive content.
Exclusive content only on YouTube. But yeah, I'll definitely link. But I mean, honestly, you go to YouTube, just type in Red Dice Diaries. That is all John stuff. He reviews games. He checks different stuff out. Is there anything you'd like to promote, John, that you just released?
I have a blog, which is just www.reddicediaries.com, which has links to the YouTube channel and also to an Anchor-based podcast that I sort of do on and off when I get the chance. But it's all sort of, the blog's mainly sort of like random tables and like stuff I've created that's just like, oh, here you go, try some of this out, see what it's like. Whereas the YouTube channel is more sort of reviews, and the podcast tends to be more just me sort of like talking about what I'm up to in terms of gaming and stuff like that.
Nice. Excellent. Do you have anything you want to promote that you're about to release?
Well, as we were talking about before we started this, we're Glyn Seal from Monkey Blood Design. He's successfully kickstarted his third Middlelands book, which is the Greater London book. It's a sort of, I suppose, if you think like Warhammer fantasy roleplay, where it sort of took like a sort of fantasy version of like Europe and Germany, the Middlelands campaign setting is basically that, but it's like the Britain and the British Isles, are sort of like with that sort of like quirky sort of like old sort of Games Workshop almost like styly sort of sense of humor. He's kickstarted that successfully. I've written one of the adventure modules that's a stretch goal for that, and there's some other great people who've also wrote adventures for it, and some extra roles and bits and pieces have gone in that. The Kickstarter's finished, but it's all available for pre-order at the moment, and I think that's going to be coming out in sort of either a month or just over or just under.
Sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I went ahead and I put to this screen your YouTube channel so that they can start looking. I'm using the cursor. I was like, this is the Midderlands that he was talking about right here earlier as well. But this is John's YouTube channel. This is Red Dice Diaries. So if you're not sure if you're in the right place, this is the right place. Go check out his stuff. It's a lot of good stuff, and he's a really good guy. Don't bother him as much as I do because I need him for questions too. No, I'm just kidding. Go bother John.
I'm always happy to answer questions.
John is a very down-to-earth guy. I really appreciate you answering questions and being on this live stream as well.
Thank you for having me.
Joe, do you have anything you wanted to promote?
First off, I wanted to say thank you to my friend Tony, who's at
thank you, Tony.
Games. Thank you so much for helping us during the stream on Sunday. He has a game that has just now had its trailer come out at E3, but he's also got a trailer for his game /round. So check that out. It's on YouTube, Overdrive Games, or just type in /round and you'll get the actual video up and you can actually have a look at it. It's a new indie game. It's pretty cool. Personally, I've been asking him, can I please have a little demo? But yeah, no, it's really cool. Obviously, the Baytarians Patreon for Animite Tales, the system that we keep talking about, or at least I do, I keep talking about, it desperately needs supporters. So, just hit us up. And as a matter of fact, if you choose one of our tiers, you might even be able to play in some of the one-shots that we do throughout the weeks. With people like me and Des and anyone else who we can get at the time. So yeah, if anyone's interested, go on Patreon and yeah, just have a look. We've even got a special like super thing at the moment where if you spend a certain amount on the latest tier, then we can very well talk with you about making your own NPC, which will have their own little side quest as part of some of the modules in our game in the actual module, and obviously you'll be credited at the bottom. So yeah, if you feel like you want a super character that has special abilities and powers that other people will have either trouble dealing with as an NPC, boss, or enemy, or as a good helpful companion during a horrible time, or during a tough heist, then yeah, just check it out. Again, it's the Baitarians Patreon for Animite Tales, so check that out. Yeah.
Yep, and Joe,
that's it.
Joe is also on Twitter, so you can definitely follow him. And Red Dice John is also on Twitter as well, Red Dice Diaries. So definitely check out their Twitter for any updates on their stuff that they do. I'm Des from the 12D20. The only announcements that I have a couple. Sunday is Father's Day, so happy Father's Day to any of you dads out there. Is it Sunday in the UK too, or is it Saturday for Father's Day? It's Sunday.
We still have the same Sundays, Des.
Well, I don't know.
No, it's actually Friday on that Sunday.
Okay, well, if it's Father's Day and wherever you are, happy Father's Day. Let's see. So, tomorrow is Joe's birthday. Happy birthday, Joe. Let's see. And so in a couple days, Monday, June 17th, we are going to the Wild West meets Japan, or the Japanese culture, using the Animite Tales system. And we are super excited about this because this is going to be the first time Animite Tales goes live to the public as the beta debut on this channel, this Twitch channel, the 12D20. And that's from 7 to 10 Central Standard Time, or Texas time, as I like to call it, on Monday, June 17th. So that's going to be a big thing for us. Our players are ready. I'm not ready. I feel like I'm going to fudge the whole thing because Joe's just going to be watching me like, don't do that. But
I mean, Des, all you have to do is just put it at a late enough time that I can't see it, and then
that's true. Okay, so we're going to change it from 10 p.m. Texas no. 7 to 10 Texas time. Friday, Jerry's going to take over DMing again for Rise of the Runelords on Pathfinder. That's from 8 to 11 Central Texas time, Central Standard Time. And then the Sunday after that is when we are rescheduling the Monty Python OneShot, and that's going to be June 23rd. That's from 2 to 4 p.m. Central Texas time, Central Standard Time, Texas time. Joe and Ben will both be on that. I asked Ben if it was okay to announce that. He never got back to me, so I'm just going to say that it's our official date that we're going to do that. So yeah, that's all the announcements I have. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you again, John, for being a part of this ridiculous live stream. No, this is crazy.
No problems again. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It was awesome to meet you, man.
And you.